Hey everybody, how you guys doing today? This is Jim from the Pain PT, and I'm very happy here to have a special guest, Dr. Dan Ratner here. Dan, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jim, and it's great to be here with you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, awesome. I'm so happy you're willing to come on. I know we talked at the Pain conference in Boulder, and I wanted to connect with you. So this is the best time we could do it when you just launched a new book. So I wanted to bring you on and talk to you a little bit about the new book. So yeah, Crushing Doubt, and I know that's right. The work that you've been doing and your podcast is Crushing Doubt, and maybe share with everybody the title. Was it easy to get that title, or was it something you thought about for more than a few seconds, or was it?
It's a great question because when I think about that title, I didn't realize the double meaning of it until later, in a way. The whole idea was that to get I read Dr. Sarno, and when I was getting better from my 8 years of back pain, it was obviously a huge component that he was saying accept the diagnosis, and I realized I needed to be very clear on these things, so I needed to crush the doubt essentially. And when it came to actually picking the title, I first picked the title for the podcast. I was writing the book, but I didn't know the book would be called this, of course, especially before I had picked the name. When it was time to pick a name for the podcast, I was like, it's really about like doing something to doubt, and the name Crushing Doubt popped into my head, and then and at some point, pretty early on, I realized, oh, it has this double meaning. It also means what it's like when you're in doubt, when you're being crushed by it.
Mm.
And I just thought, well, that is really cool that it's got that double meaning. And as soon as I found that double meaning, I was like, yeah, that's the name. That's
That's
what it
it. That's gonna be, and it is an absolutely great name.
is.
The word crushing is such a great word too, if you think about it, in terms of and doubt.
Yeah.
I doubts is that lingering thing that really can hang around, and so the crush it is something that's meaningful.
Yeah. Well, it physicalizes the imagined experience of it, which is exactly what it's like. I mean,
Yeah.
so many people are riddled with these symptoms that are really just so destructive feeling. And it's amazing to turn it on its head and go in the other direction.
Yeah. So you said you've been writing the book for a few years now. When did you start to work on the book? When did you start come up with the idea of writing a book?
Okay, so I'm a little sheepish about this because uh, it it started 12 years ago.
Wow.
Now, when I say that, don't think that I was writing a book for 12 years. I was not. What happened is after I got better from my back pain, having discovered Sarno and exploring some of these things, I realized I'm thinking some things about this that are different than what I'm hearing anywhere, which was kind of to my surprise. Actually, I was like, oh, you guys aren't seeing this element, or these elements. So I was talking to a friend the New Year's Eve after I had finally gotten better, I think, or maybe the one after that. And I said, someday I'm going to write a book about this. And he said, what do you mean someday? And I totally understood what he meant. I was like, oh, you're saying I should just get started now. And the next day I started writing.
Wow.
Now this book has gone through many iterations. So the book that I was writing then is very different than what I ended up writing, but it did have components to it. So there was a long period of developing these ideas and thinking it through and shifting things around. That's one of the answers. But the other answer I would say is that once I launched the podcast and I was seeing lots and lots of people, I was answering so many people's questions that I was really honing my understanding. And so my joke is that the longer that this book took to write, the better it got, which is
Yeah.
completely true. I almost feel like Dr. Sarno wrote 4 books. I feel like this is my 4th book. It's
Yeah.
also my first book, but
Yeah.
it's been that worked over.
Yeah.
And so I would say it's really been in the last 4 years, maybe 3.5 years or so, that I was like, okay, time to finish this off. Time to really make this into the product it needs to be.
Yeah. And I'm excited. I know there's been a bunch of new books released all around the same time
Yeah.
in space. And so I have your book too on Kindle and I'm waiting to get to it. So I'm going to read through it and I'm looking forward to it. Maybe share with the audience a bit about it. I mean, in terms of what's in there, what people can take from it, what people can learn from it.
So one of the ways that I describe this book is it's like a third memoir, it's a third my system, and then it's a third almost like a Malcolm Gladwell, like, what does this all mean? What's the significance of this? And so you're gonna get my personal story about the back pain and other experiences that I've had. But you're also gonna get a very strong dose of like the broadest picture I could paint of why it's so clear that mind body symptoms are the dominant force in our physical lives. And so I lay out the history of literature. I lay out the history of philosophy. I lay out all the different arguments that structuralists make and why they actually don't fit. Basically, that first third of the book is attacking doubt relentlessly to
Interesting.
show this is an open and shut case.
Mm,
Almost all of you and the symptoms you're having, these are mind body and they can be reversed.
mm,
Then we shift into the system. I introduce the system, and the system has these three columns, which are just three different ways of understanding mind body process and how to recognize when am I dealing with which of these three? And what do I do when I realize I'm dealing with which of these three? So it lays out the system, and then it lays out ideas about how to think different based on what you figured out. What are the different ways that you're going to think about things at different moments? Because I say very frequently, we are moment to moment beings. We don't stay in the same place about these things. So 1 minute, one thing helps, and at the next minute, it doesn't. It's not the thing you need anymore. So it really addresses that moment to moment experience. And then finally, it deals with the implications. What does this
mm,
mean for what medical training should be like? What does it mean for how psychologists should train? What does it mean for how different fields should interact? Like, PT and
mm.
psychologists. How should we be interacting about this? Because it's together that we're going to get there. And then it really talks about our responsibility to each other. That if you understand mind body reality, then you know that how we treat each other affects our physical health.
Mm.
And so there's almost like a moral imperative to focus how we live differently. I just thought that was a really interesting component of what it ended up being.
Yeah, that's great. And then in the three columns, right? Maybe share a little bit more with that with the audience if you'd like. I know that's like sort of the foundation of your work. And how did
Mm-hmm.
you come to these three columns? Were there always three columns, or were there two or four, or
Yeah.
you kind of boiled it down to these three areas?
So it really started off as two columns. The third column I didn't discover until later, and I'll explain why in a second. But the way that I discovered the columns, first of all, I want to give a huge amount of credit to Dr. Sarno. He just saved my life. But there were things even after reading Dr. Sarno that I had questions about still, which makes sense. That'll probably be true for people who read my book too, though I tried to answer every question I can think of in advance. Um, but when I started looking at this, a huge part of what Dr. Sarno wrote about was emotional. He writes about the fact that these emotions were driving the pain. So I think a lot of people then feel like, okay, I got to just keep looking for the emotion. And there are emotional components, but what I found is that's not always the way to go. And I even thought about it. I was like, well, does this mean I was having the same emotion for 8 years? And
Yeah.
that's why I had the back pain. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. We changed so much. So I started looking at, wait a minute, this seems to be about feeling, but it also seems to be about thinking, because I knew that a huge part of my suffering continued because of how I was thinking. And I'm not blaming myself for that, but I'm just recognizing I thought I was broken. I thought I was damaged. I thought I was in danger. This was all thinking. I had feelings about that too,
Yeah.
but there was thinking. So I just started looking at those two components just to see what was what. And I started to, it was just all personal observation at first. I was like, wait a minute. I get new symptoms around a feeling, the onsets. It's not about what I'm thinking. It's like out of nowhere. I'm like, oh, I thought I was fine, but I was having some kind of feeling, and boom, I have some shoulder pain or something like that.
Mm,
So I started to connect emotions with the onsets
mhm.
of symptoms. And then I noticed this was also true for upticks, that a symptom, an existing symptom that suddenly went up, it totally correlated with my emotional life. Again, just personal observation. But the symptoms that just stayed in the same place had almost nothing to do with emotion. It was about
Yeah.
how I was thinking about it.
Mm, I agree
So
with
that
that. Yeah.
Glad to hear it. That was the initial separation of the two original columns. So when I started working with people, yeah, there were just two columns. But then I had this amazing thing happen where I got better from the back pain, and I was in a there's no other way to describe it. I was in a bad therapy. I've had very, very good therapy most of the time, but I was in a bad therapy, though that ended up being one of the most useful things I ever did, weirdly. And one of the things I discovered in it is that I realized I had to fire him. And the main reason I finally realized I had to fire him is I had just gotten better from back pain. And I came in and I said to him, I know you don't really believe in this whole mind body thing so much, but like, what do you have to say about the fact that I read this book or two books by this guy and I'm now totally better? And he said, I just think your back finally healed. And
Mm.
I was like, oh my God, I am
Yeah,
dealing
you're
with
fired.
a complete Philistine. Like what is going on here? So that was the moment. And what it did is it gave me this sense of power. It gave me this sense of, you know what? I know something that this guy doesn't know. And I don't have to wait around for him. And so I discovered the power column through
Mm.
this process of realizing a number of things, but one of them being, oh my God, this is like my mission in life. Like I started feeling very connected to myself in a way, and in a really good feeling way, that there was a purpose to things, that a direction to things. And that's really what the power column is about. Is
Mm.
what I decided is, let's not have people just wait around for this lightning bolt to happen like it happened with me. Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
And so I realized, okay, wait a minute. There's something about what I've come to call power, which is just good relationship with yourself, self alignment, peace with the self. That's power to me.
Yeah.
And when I looked at it, I realized, oh, you know what? There's a symptom presentation for this one too.
Mm.
Because when I really discovered it, it was I had gotten better, very much so, but I was kind of stuck at a little plateau.
Mm.
And I discovered this primarily through working with one other individual. I was talking to her about her symptoms. She was getting better. Her doubt was coming down, but she kind of got stuck at a plateau. And I asked her, is there anything? Because I was thinking about power. I was like, is there anything that's bothering you about thinking about the mind body experience that's not letting you feel totally free to accept it fully? And she was like, yeah, I don't really want it to be mind body. I was like, oh, why not? And she said, because then it's my fault. Which
Mm.
I don't agree with at all, but I
Right.
understood what she was saying. So then I came up with this phrase for that, which is, just because you are the cure does not mean you are the cause.
Yeah, that's right. That's great.
And it was just, and that moved her past that. So I realized onsets and upticks, you want to discover the emotions behind it, because
Mm.
that takes away the symptom distraction, which is what Sarno talked about. But with doubt, you can't operate that same way. You're not going to go looking for emotion. You need to change how you're thinking, which
Mhm.
can break up the seeming chronicity of things.
Mm. Mhm.
And basically teach yourself that you don't need the protection that doubt thinks you need.
Yeah.
You're not in danger. And then in the power column, I found that there is a deep part of us that wants to communicate who we are, not only to ourselves, but to the world.
Yeah.
And receiving that communication gets you past those plateaus.
Mm. I think of that famous quote. I think it was Marion Williamson. It says, "Our greatest fear is our own power. Our greatest power in ourselves. That we fear that more than anything. We
Yeah.
don't step into that. Into ourselves." And I really like what you said about feeling that it's my fault, or you said broken. I think the opposite of that is power, right? Of feeling empowered or feeling right, whole or complete or confident or
Yeah, and what I kind of did a reprocessing of my whole trauma experience. Trauma is a word that gets thrown around a lot, but at the same time, most people have had some kind of trauma, and the real question is, well, what do you do with it? And I came to feel that my trauma went from a bunch of horrible things that I felt really bad about, and sometimes made me even feel bad about myself, to feeling that actually that's my superpower.
mm,
I know about this suffering and I know what to do about it. It's like incredibly empowering.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like those columns. I like how you developed that last one. And so you found with working those three columns, working with people, right, in your particular system, you found that be very effective with identifying where people are, what they're missing, or where they're lacking in those three areas.
It's been incredibly effective, and I would say even more effective than I thought it would be. It's almost like I set out to understand these things, and I tried to describe them. But what I found is, oh wait, I kind of just described the human experience from a new angle,
Hmm.
and it covers everything. I kept looking for, is there a fourth column? And I
Yeah.
was like, there isn't. This covers everything. So what I found is every time I sit down with somebody and we talk about a given moment, these three columns can always identify what is going on in that moment, which
Mm.
then points them in the right direction of what to do. So we're making it much more efficient
Yeah.
getting where we need to go. Even as a therapist,
Yeah.
for people who come to me not even for pain or other symptoms, I'm much more effective as a therapist because I can zero in on these three columns, know exactly what's the nature of the problem. Is this a doubt problem? Is this about not having the awareness in the emotions column? Is this
Mhm.
about a conflict with the self that needs to be resolved? And it's also just a much faster system. There are times where I'll do, especially power column work, I call high speed therapy. There are times where in a couple of sessions, I do work and I think that would have taken me 4 years in therapy.
Mm.
It's
Wow.
it's like it's crazy.
So having that framework, right, and then you know what you're looking for, you can identify it, or you can see it in people, right, in the way that they're talking about things or questions. Yeah, I like that. And you have a framework to work off of that you can go to, right, and address
Mm-hmm.
because it is the mind body space. There's lots of things now. There's more things coming in. We've got pain reprocessing therapy, we got emotional awareness expression therapy, we got work of like graded exposure, we got, changing your beliefs and all these different things, reducing the fear. So having a system, it sounds like you've developed, and it came out of your own. What I like about it is it came out of your own experience,
Mm-hmm.
your own lived experience in a way.
Yeah, and then all the readings that I did, all the research, it just I saw how it all fit together, and I wanted to address what you said about the mind body field because I think a lot of sufferers out there, they might try one thing and find that a particular thing works or another thing doesn't as much, and everybody in this field is doing great work. But one of the things that is a nice added element of my system is you can fit each one of those things within the columns. You can see why did that one work for that person at that time. And because they're all offering great things, but it's just an added advantage to see why did that one work for that person at that time, and why did it not work for this person at this time.
Right, right. That's great. So yeah, so the book takes people through those areas. I like how the first third you said was really about challenging the status quo, right? Or looking through the different history of these things, philosophy and history. And I like that. I'm gonna be interested in reading that and then
Mm-hmm.
bring it into the columns and into now. So people can take from that, reading that book, they can really apply that to themselves, you think, from that information? Is that the they take away from that book?
Well, not only can they apply it to themselves, but I would say that the tonality of the book feels like a conversation between me and them. I mean, I'm really talking to each individual sufferer. So I think as people read it, they're going to feel like not only can they apply it to them, it's already being applied to them in this book. So there's so many universal experiences that sufferers have, and obviously we all have some specifics, some idiosyncratic experiences, but there's also so many experiences we all have. Like if I start talking about the fact that most sufferers have way too much information and also way too little information all at the same time, I'm pretty sure almost everybody has felt that.
Yeah.
And so there's so many ways people are going to be able to relate to what I experienced because I've talked to people about it. My experience, yeah, it had its idiosyncrasies, but mostly it was very similar to what I hear about.
Hmm. Yeah. And what I have a question about the columns. What have you noticed in your work with people? Is it a mixture? Is there certain columns you see in people more often that you find that, oh yeah, I see this more often than the other ones?
Yeah, I mean, my first answer is that people say, well, there's three columns. Why is it called crushing doubt? Why is doubt like front and center in this? And the way that I want to answer that is that doubt to me is its own column, but it's also the overarching principle of everything. So the
Mm,
columns are trying to make sense of everything. They're trying to bring down doubt overall. The doubt column is where you do very specific doubt column work.
mm,
But I have this phrase, you make sense and your symptoms make sense. I keep saying that to people
mm.
because the whole idea is if you start to think, well, maybe it's random or maybe I can't figure it out, then you're lost.
Yeah.
So the whole idea is first and foremost, everybody has doubt. It is the human condition. Everybody comes in with doubt. And if I had to say which column is the dominant column, it's the doubt column. And that's where we're always going to start working.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's simply about why is this system going to get you answers? Why is it going to be different than other things you've done? And once I get them to see, oh, there's a method to how I can ask questions and you give me answers that moves me towards it making sense.
Yeah.
Now we're bringing down doubt. But you will find people who come in and they don't have a lot of doubt in a certain way anyway. They're like, no, I know this is mind body. I even know it can be reversed, but just tell me what to do. Like
Mm,
that's a relatively low doubt kind of person.
yeah.
And then you might find that, okay, then I'm going to look in the other columns and see what's the dominant feature here.
Yeah.
Could be in the emotions column. You get some people who just they're thinkers. They don't think about their feelings very much. They miss the cues with themselves. They're not fully aware of what's going on for them. That would be somebody that's a more emotions column dominant person. But that's actually the most rare of the three.
Mm,
Most people
yeah.
know a
Interesting.
lot. Most
Mm,
people know a lot about their own experience. The more typical ones are huge doubters, and then the other big one is power column people. The emotions column is incredibly useful in a targeted way, but there are these two categories where I tend to see people more. You're either a huge doubter or you've got something going on in the power column, and that's actually comes from a specific form of doubt. They don't have doubt that they have mind body symptoms. They don't have doubt their symptoms harder to conquer than others, but they have doubt about whether they can do it.
they can do it. Yeah. Yeah. Tell me if this is wrong or not thinking this way. I think of that being like maybe a shame kind of category, right? Or loss of how we think about ourselves category, in a way, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say shame to me would be one of the many forms that it can take.
Mm,
Sometimes it's shame. Sometimes it's like hyper vigilant fear based on what they experienced from the trauma. Sometimes it's a sense of feeling. I suppose this fits with shame in a way, but there can be a sense of a lack of validity that doesn't always necessarily take a shame form. It's just like, I don't belong here or I don't deserve it. There can be guilt. There can be unresolved mourning, all
mhm.
these different parts. But the way I would think about it probably best is if you're not in alignment with yourself, if you don't feel at peace with yourself, you got a power column thing going on. It's an incredibly common experience.
Yeah.
And the work that we can do here is it's like we retell the story of how we suffered in a way where we can finally actually hear what happened to us. People develop actual self empathy from power column work that I've never seen happen even in 20 years of therapy. I did not develop that self empathy. I only developed it once I saw that bad therapist was doing exactly all the worst stuff that happened in my life,
Yeah.
and it's time for me to be in my own corner.
Yeah. I like that. I like that a lot. So there's a bit of that self-empowerment, self-compassion, self-empathy, right? So how you connect with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
it's a real and one of the things that's so interesting to me about it is I got almost all of my information from what my symptoms told me. I I didn't have that intellectual understanding even after 20 years of therapy where I'd gone over the facts many times.
Mm,
Because in this bad therapy, one of the things that happened is when the therapist went away, he went away for 1 week, and my back pain shot through the roof. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, this does seem connected, but why? I'm glad he's leaving. Why would I be having a symptom? And what I came to realize when it happened a second time, I was like, well, this is unequivocally evidence that this is a mind body experience, but it's also my body telling me it knows something I don't. So I started taking it at its word. I was like, okay, my body knows more than I do sometimes. What's
mm.
it telling? Then I was able to think about it and realize, yeah, I didn't mind him going away, but here's what I did mind. I minded that we had no real connection. I minded that this was yet another person who's supposed to care about me who didn't. That I
Yeah.
minded. And my body told me it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It reminded you of that. Yeah, that's interesting to see that about yourself, right? Meaning the meaning of that.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have just thought it out. The body carries certain wisdom. And if we're not factoring that in, we're missing major pieces of information.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah. So the book is out right now. It's out for purchase, which is exciting. How is it going with the feedback on it so far?
Well, the feedback actually has been fantastic, which I've been really thrilled about. Obviously, nothing could be better than your readers read it and they say, "Wow, this is, really resonating with me," or "It really helped." Or I actually had at least two people say, "You answered every question I could think of," which I
Mm.
was like, "Wow, okay, that's very thorough then."
Yeah.
Um, the response has been really, really positive. The uh, you know, really the whole experience has been great. But I just can't wait for more and more people to read it so we can just keep having this conversation. Because one of my goals in writing this book was to move into the phase of my career where we're going to have discussions that are based on what I've already written that
Mm-hmm.
push these conversations even further.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those conversations are now starting to happen. I love when people come to me and they're like, "You wrote this in the book," and I'm always pleased because I'm like, "Yep, I agree with what I wrote," and you know,
Still stands true.
yeah. So it's been really great.
Yeah, that's great. And that's great. You can put that out there because, like you said, people can come to you with a baseline now and understanding, right? And then you can go into the depth of the work personally, right, with them.
Yeah, I mean, I do weekly Q&As and people ask brilliant, wonderful questions, but I think the depth and the quality of the questions is going to grow even more as the community is all on the same page about this.
Yeah.
To use a publishing pun, I suppose, but it's been really fun to see.
Yeah, that's great. And congrats on the book. I mean, writing a book is no small feat. And even though
Thank
he's
you.
12 years, you kind of worked on it more recently, but still just putting a book out there and it's so much needed. It's really needed, like you said, to shift people's mindsets. The paradigm needs to change. So the more we can get that out there, the better. And so you putting your work out there is awesome. And the columns work sounds really, I mean, I've heard you speak about it before and I've learned more about it today. It sounds awesome. I love the framework. And to me, it makes a lot of sense as well. And
Thank
take
you.
through that process. Yeah. So how can people find out more about your work? So you have the book out, you offer other services too to help people. Maybe share a little bit about that as well.
Sure. So my website is www.crushingdoubt.com. And on that website, you can find all my resources. There's, links to the book. Although if you want to order the book directly, you can also do www.crushingdoubtbook.com, which goes straight to the book order. But also on the website are my teaching seminars. So these are 8 sessions where one of the first things I do is I'm helping people field all of the things that they hear about in the mind body community and making sense of that in these seminars. How do they all fit together? And so I talk about that. Then I go into like seriously crushing doubt in the way that I do in the book as well. And then I teach about the system. And when I started these seminars, I got really good response to them. People had a great experience. But what I found is that people often need more help implementing the system, especially at the beginning. It's actually a very simple system once it really clicks. But at first, I think people can be like, "Oh, I don't know." Doubt, in fact, comes in and is like,
Right.
"This is too complicated."
Right.
Um, but I really have gotten it down to its essence. And what people can do after the seminars or after reading the book is they can come to my group membership meetings. And these are Zoom calls, they're private Zoom calls, they're not recorded, where people can not only ask questions, but there's a dialogue with me where we can get much further than just like in a Q&A. It's not just answering questions because I'm asking, all right, wait, why are you asking that question? What do you need to know? And I can get very specific information to them. And what I tell my group members is don't spend the time in group just waiting for your turn to talk with me and not noticing what's happening in the others. I'm always relating every single conversation back to this overall framework of the columns.
Mm.
So between the book and the seminars and the groups, you can get all of those resources on my website. And You can almost also email me, dan@crushingdoubt.com. Uh, I really want not only to help every sufferer that I can, but it was important to me that this book and my work in general not just be about that. I also want the people around the sufferers to understand what's happening because they'll support the recovery so much better
Mm.
and they'll cause less doubt. And I also wanted it to be for everyone. I want doctors to read it, so they're starting to think about it differently. I want therapists to read it, so they start thinking about it differently. And I want the whole world to understand these concepts, which is exactly, I think Dr. Sarno said this at some point in responding to his own work. He just wanted people to understand these concepts. He wanted everybody to get
Yeah,
it. If we can do that, we'll put ourselves out of business, and that's good.
that's right.
I'll find a new business
Find a new business. That's
because
right.
I want everybody. If I could get everybody to understand this, and we were all on the same page, my work is done. That's great.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I know, we talked at the conference, your heart's definitely in it. I know that for sure, right? And
Yeah.
we all are here to help people and to put your work out there is it's amazing, right? And your version of it too. And I think that's important because it can help people see it from a different angle, maybe they haven't seen it from before, like you said, and it might click for them in a way
Uh-huh.
it didn't click before, right? I'm sure people have said that to you.
Oh, sure. And I've heard that about your work as well, Jim. And I think everybody in the field, we each have a particular angle, and certain angles are going to unlock things for certain people.
Yeah.
So I would even say, like, if you read my book or you come to work on my resources and they don't click, don't give up anyway, because there's other people in the field who are going to have different angles, and you're going to find the one that works for you. Now, my hope was to build something that works for everybody, but this is such a wonderful field. And Jim, I loved meeting you and everybody at that conference. I mean, it was like no conference I've ever been to without any question. We were all so happy to be there with each other.
I was still buzzing for days afterwards. Like it took me a time to come back down from that whole experience.
I know. Settling back into normal life was not so
Yeah,
easy.
that's right. We'll do it again next year. I just got an email. We're going to be doing it again.
I I can't wait. Yep.
So fantastic. So they can get the book at your website. They can get the book at Amazon as well. Is there there's Kindle version, audio version yet?
There's a Kindle version. Yes, I did want to mention there's I don't know when this episode is going to come out, but we're switching over to a new Amazon page, so there's going to be a couple of days where it's a little thorny. Right now, it's fine. You can still order Kindle,
Okay.
but if you want to get paper copies, you got to go directly to my website. So I would say use the link www.crushing.book.com. But in a couple of days, we're going to have the Amazon up normal again. And there was just a little snafu we had to figure out. Then the Audible version is coming. I would say in a couple months. I was actually going to start recording it, and then I got a mind body driven cold for sure. It was right after the launch too. Like
I,
the launch was great, but it also was, it has its stressful kind of experience in a way. And I came down with a cold. I was like, well, I can't record the audiobook with this. So
yeah,
it'll be coming out soon.
great, great. I think Dan Buglio mentioned that too for his book that he came down with some mind body symptom as well, right when the book was being
Oh,
released.
I'm
Heck,
sure. I bet it
we're
was dark.
human, and
Yeah.
you
Yep.
know, especially us, right? We're the ones who are doing this work. We've had our own conditions as well, so we're part of everybody else's. It's the same thing. Well, thank you so
100%.
much for coming on, Dan. Is there anything else you want to leave the audience with today before you go?
I mean, the main thing that I would say is really just watch out for how sneaky doubt is. It's going to convince you you can't get it done or you can't get the answers. But this is a field that is full of people who are some of the most caring people I've ever encountered, and also really ingenious. The work that you do, Jim, the work that other people do in this field. I was blown away by it at the conference. I was like, wow, there is some amazing stuff going on here. So the main thing is do not lose hope. Doubt wants to convince you that you're not going to be able to get this done. You always can. Everybody can get better from mind body symptoms. There's a way. Don't give up. Keep asking your questions and get your answers to your full satisfaction.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Dan. I'm sure we'll connect again. We'll see you in September, if not before. And thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim. It was a pleasure.